Hi, my name is Ann Ayers. I have the honor of being the Dean of the Colorado Women's College and of being a friend and a colleague of Valentina Iturbe-LaGrave, who's here today to chat with us. And so thank you so much for joining us. I woke up this morning with, with a heavy heart. And I think I look at the news and what I wanted more than anything was to be able to talk to somebody who could help me make sense of some of it and help me figure out what steps I can take forward in the context of living a whole life. And so sometimes the universe works in great ways. This conversation is happening. So I hope that you all will also post your comments and your questions along the way so that Valentina can lend her wisdom to all of us. So to introduce Valentina, I just want to tell you that I always love to do some of the academic credentials. It's fun to be within a university, and I think it's a way to honor some of your hard work. What we're going to get to in the conversation, though, is what you believe, and that will also be the important piece. But Valentina holds 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree, as well as a Ph.D. from the University of Colorado, a change leadership certificate from Cornell, and a certificate in program strategy and evaluation from Stanford. Importantly, also, she is right now the co-principal investigator in almost a $2 million NSF grant where they're exploring the inclusive identities of engineers and computer scientists. I certainly have worked a lot in moving women forward in STEM. So I know you're looking at more identities than just gender identity, but I love that you're doing that work. Valentina and I first crossed paths because of the work that I'm doing to shift the culture at DU, which is a sort of big project we have going on called Community Plus Values. And Valentina stepped in, and I think the conversation went from being this deep to being this deep, just like that. So welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. Your official title is Director of Inclusive Teaching Practices at DU, but I think your real title might be just awesomeness, the chair, Director of Awesomeness. So it's good to have you. I thought maybe it just makes sense to kind of start with the bigger context here. Over the years in your work, I'm sure that you have had an opportunity to think about and practice, what do I do with my work and my life in the context of what's going on in the world, especially when, it's an inequity that's at every single headline. And there's heartache and heartbreak, and we know that people are suffering. And so it's a heavy place to start, but it's where we all are right now. So I thought we would just start there.
Yeah, well, thanks, Anne, for inviting me to be here today and for that generous introduction. So yes, at the core of everything I do in my work in academia is the whole self and well-being. I'm not shy about talking to folks about how my own intersecting social identities and changing positionalities throughout my life really inform everything I do. My entire praxis is built on this. And that's to say that the broader context of our day, of our week, of our months, of our years informs absolutely everything we do and how we inhabit all of our spaces, whether that's in a classroom teaching, whether that is doing research, whether that is at home parenting or caretaking or being a friend to someone. It's at the forefront and at the very core of how we engage others. And so I've been thinking a lot about this heaviness. I've been sitting with this heaviness for a few days now. For me, it really started with the February 23rd event in Georgia, whereby we saw Ahmaud Arbery be chased down and killed in broad daylight for exercising freedom. We saw it again with Christian Cooper, bird watching in Central Park. We've seen that play out in the news in real time. And most recently, we've seen it with George Floyd in Minneapolis. And everyone, I think, who is watching us today is probably aware of these issues that are unfolding around us, of the great violence on Black and brown bodies. And, this continues to be an issue for us in the country, people who are just exercising their freedom. And we're left with this very violent imagery of young Black men who are hunted down, who are forcibly restrained, who are killed in broad daylight. And we have access now to these experiences, and they're hard to watch, they're hard to process, they're hard to sit with. As part of my work at the University of Denver, I am always staying up with the news, and I can't really monitor my news media diet in the way that I think I would if this were not my role and at the core of my work. And I think, you know, this is to say that the past is very much present. You know, the legacies of inequity, of enslavement, of colonialism that have defined the American experience are with us today. As one of my colleagues at DU has said to me, the past cannot be made innocent. We have not moved past a lot of these things. We live and inhabit our world with them, and they certainly impact how we work, right? And so I have to engage in active conversations around trauma-informed pedagogy with the faculty at the University of Denver. We have to look at how we teach and how we root everything we do in a classroom in an understanding that individuals are impacted by personal and a generational history of harm and oppression. And we cannot teach without that understanding in the forefront, especially today. And so that heaviness sits with me. And, you know, that I think we'll get to a conversation about self-care later on. But yeah, these are really triggering times.
I was to say, I saw, you know, one of the articles that has been popping up in my Facebook feed is, you might think your Black colleagues are okay, but they're not. And I spent some time reading that. I want you to kind of connect that title of that article with what you were talking about trauma-informed pedagogies. So that word, kind of that phrase, slips right by me, and I intellectually get what it is. Give us a visual on what that looks like. What is that? What is the trauma-informed pedagogy brought to life?
So this is when in the classroom, you know, and I can give you two perspectives here, the perspective of the faculty member who's preparing to teach a class, and I can give you the perspective of the student who's about to log into a class or attend, you know, a face-to-face class. You know, for the faculty member, we are trying to engage in self-reflection, and we're trying to engage in a critical analysis of larger structures that are oppressive and that, you know, impact us at a very individual level that may not be impacting some of our students. And some of our students may be fully unaware of the fact that this is happening to us, right? And as faculty of color and underrepresented women in academia and folks in academia, this happens to us on the daily, right? I might be coming to campus and I might be approached and have someone ask, you know, a different flavor, like my daily flavor of microaggression, right? On my way to give a talk or on my way to a meeting. This is already affecting my day and how I'm going to be interacting with folks. I'm going to be on higher alert. My flags are going to be up. I'm going to want to process this, right? But I know that the classroom might not be the space to do it. So faculty are now, you know, we talk a lot about viral load right now. I think we need to start talking about traumatic load around inequity and oppression and power and privilege. And then for students, it's, you know, at a PWI, for example, and that's a predominantly white institution of higher education, something that we see is our students are in these spaces oftentimes with classmates who have no idea what their day is like, what their life is like living in this country at this time, right? What their experiences have been up to here. So getting to know your students, teaching in a way that conveys your awareness that they are whole human beings in that space, that they have emotions, that they are in physical bodies that have needs that are all different, what they're bringing into the classroom. And that's really at the core of inclusive pedagogy, is realizing that we have whole selves in there and that we are not just teaching content. You know, we want to help our students grow as individuals and active members of society.
Yeah, I think about that. We have our awesome Colorado Women's College leadership scholars who are predominantly first generation college going women and also women of color, actually. And what has been amazing to me, I mean, I will never forget one of them telling me my first year, I don't know what an orientation is. right? Like, and not having the structure within her family to say, this is what's going to happen in these 3 days when you first get to campus, and here's what it is. And I just sat back and had to think to myself, what she needs and what we need to teach her is broader and just a little different, right? And if we just jump in and kind of just throw her into the mix, she won't get the same benefit that somebody who had a different set of expectations coming in, a perhaps more rounded or deeper set of expectations. And that was just, I mean, it's a very simple example, but I think we can miss if we aren't taking into consideration and letting people come as they are and understanding, and that's, so it's hugely important. I want to ask you this, just, I think it's helpful for folks to understand, what's your journey been to this current role that you have? And will you answer that not just professionally in the building blocks, but also who have you become along the way?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I think it would be worthwhile to start with just how I got to the US, right?
Yeah.
I was born in South America. I was born in Venezuela at a time where the country was flourishing economically. And so I got to live this really almost romantic, tropical life and reality. And it was beautiful. And I was not aware of too much oppression. And I grew up in a very privileged setting, in a very educated family. And I traveled a lot since I was tiny. My brother actually reminded me recently that he's like, your first transatlantic flight was at 6 months old. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. And so I've grown up traveling and being exposed to many cultures and languages and within my own family. And so I moved to the US when I'm 12 years old. I moved to Colorado, of all places. And that was where my awakening started. And I call it an awakening because that's where I understood and had to start understanding my identity in the context of difference. Because I grew up in a country where my friends looked like me, spoke like me, ate the same foods as me, right? So
Right.
Here I am, this kid in Colorado at 12, and I have this very vivid image in my mind. I go to the cafeteria and I don't know anyone. And my English is good, but it's not perfect. I don't know slang, so I'm not picking up a lot of things. And I see another girl whose sandwich was also wrapped in tinfoil, like mine.
Yeah.
Because my mom wrapped them in tinfoil. This is what you do in South America. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my friend. And sure enough, she
I love that.
yeah, so we become friends over our tinfoiled wrapped sandwiches. And so we find a commonality, right? And I start there. And I start to experience a lot of things that were incredibly problematic, and I did not know how to verbalize, how to think through them, how to work through them intellectually at all. I didn't have the language or the words to be able to depersonalize this discomfort of difference in my life. I didn't know it. And so this goes on, through high school. I remember in high school, my mom goes to parent-teacher conferences, and someone, the teachers, without even looking at my grade, which by the way was pretty stellar, says to my mom, in this very slow English, assuming that she did not understand, even though she speaks several languages, he says to her, your daughter has like a language barrier, all the way to my brother in high school takes an AP test and he gets the highest score in the country, and he was made to retake the test because how could the Hispanic boy get this score, right? So he was presumed criminal, right? It was presumed that he had cheated on an AP test. And so, I start having these experiences that are so new, and I'm trying to figure out why is this happening? This of course is not fair. I knew this all along. I get to college, and I actually started college as a physics major. I was really into math and science, and I quickly switched over to the humanities, much to my dad's, well, he did not like that very much. He was like thrilled about that. He's an MD, and I started really to explore identity. And so in college, I really started to flourish and understand the language and understand the context within which I was experiencing all these things. Add to it the fact that I look younger than I am, that I was a young mother. I became a mother at the age of 21. So you can imagine like all the assumptions that were made about me, my capabilities, everything, right? At that time. And then I went through my entire educational career, either pregnant, raising a child, or raising several children and pregnant,
Right.
and then, like nursing children. And
we're both moms of 4, so I'm totally resonating with this, like, yeah.
Absolutely. And I faced, right, the institutional discomfort around motherhood. Very well acquainted with that. And I remember, I would sometimes bring my kiddos to campus with me. I would, but this is all to say, I discovered amazing voices. I discovered a history of intellectuals that have been having these conversations, and they precede us, right? And my hope is that we will engage a new era and a new generation of voices that will be here after we leave. And that, the first time I read Paulo Freire, right, like that just blew my mind. And I said, wow, teaching is a political act within these structures. And that made so much sense. And then reading Bell Hooks and understanding that, her famous quote that academia is not paradise, but learning is a place where we can create paradise, right?
Oh, I love it.
It's beautiful. And so how do we create that for
Say it
ourselves?
one more time. Just say it one more time. I just want to hear.
So Bell Hooks said that the academy is not paradise, but learning is a place where paradise can be created.
So good. That's just so good. Okay, keep talking.
So I think, we need to carry these voices forward. Again, none of the conversations that we're having are new. And I say this to people all the time when there's a lot of discomfort around my work and what I do. And they, there's resistance, like, what do you mean, inclusive teaching? Why do we need this? We don't really need this. We need to focus on learning outcomes. Like, well, they'll be much better if you understand your whole student, right? And so that was part of my trajectory. I'm curious. I think you can see in my bookshelf in the back, I'm a curious girl, and I'm an avid reader. I read a ton, and when I want to learn about something, I'll pursue it deeply. So I was interested in my doctorate. I was interested in issues of power, privilege, and oppression, specifically around women in South America. I wanted to know where the women were, and then I ended up focusing on executions of women in Latin America and how that influenced the codification of penal codes in regard to female transgression. And so this was always in the forefront. I graduate with a Ph.D. and I started my first administrative role in academia at that time. And I remember I was pushing these issues forward at a campus that was not ready to have the conversation, nor did it really want to have the conversation. And I was told at a meeting, and this was kind of the turning point, and for everybody out there who's feeling this, I just want you to know that you create your own path. And that's not in the cheesy way that you see it in quotes, but just be creative and strategic and do it. So I was told to stop pursuing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion openly at a meeting. And unquote, I was told to be careful because I would be seen as the angry Latina on the campus. That made me angry.
I wasn't actually being angry, but now I'm being angry. Yeah.
Now that made me really angry. And I think how we contextualize and use anger can be incredibly powerful if we channel it correctly, right? Like anger can energize us to do things and move in a way that we wouldn't otherwise. It gives us a sense of urgency to act and to do. So that's exactly what I did. I was like, okay, I think my time at this institution is done because this is at the core of my beliefs as a person. This is what I do. This is really what I convey to my children outside of my work. So I can't, divorce the two. This is who I am, period. So a colleague of mine actually emailed me this job posting from the University of Denver saying, at the time it was Assistant Director for Inclusive Teaching. It was an inaugural role at the University of Denver. And I actually received the posting the day it was due, on the deadline for applying. So I just rallied, I applied, long story short, I got the job. And something that excited me tremendously about it was that I would not inherit any programming. This was important to me. I wanted to be
It's
sure.
a blank slate, right?
It was a blank slate. It was a blank slate.
Create your own path.
It was my own path. And so I was, you know, that's scary, right? When you arrive at a place, you're the first person hired in this role and you have to create from scratch. It's accelerating and it's also, you know, scary. But I've just been incredibly lucky at DU to have, to work with the most amazing colleagues across all ranks and departments, and really have people who believed in my creative approaches to the work.
Yeah.
They're not your usual approach to the work, and I've been fully, you know, supported to do that. And so that's how I'm here.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have a new cheerleader in me over the last year in supporting that work. We had Tracy Kazee on, so you know Dr. Kazee, who has consulted with us on our C+B project and was ran diversity and inclusion for the NYPD. I've got to imagine her commentary in a day like today would be helpful too. So one of the things that she talked about is working in diversity, equity, inclusion. It's hard. It's it can be exhausting. She's privately coached me on that a bit, and just said, you know, sometimes you have to give yourself a break. So what are some of your ways that you take care of yourself, just to kind of make sure that you can be resilient, and that when you have those kinds of comments in meetings, you can field them and you cannot let it break you?
Absolutely. And I shared the PG version of the comments that I got.
Come on, we are totally not a PG. We can be we can, you know, maybe not X, but our listeners are tough. They're tough. Our community.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've had US-based anti-Hispanic hate groups use my material for anti-Hispanic hate posts that have been posted online, right? And shared and called to action and violence against Hispanic people. So, you know, there's quite a spectrum. Self-care is critical. My self-care, and I'm very blunt about this, because people might look at me and say like, wow, like you seem to have it all together. Well, yeah, it requires a team of experts and professionals backing me up to do that. Self-care for me really goes beyond, you know, working out. I have a psychotherapist that has worked with me for many years and has been an incredible support, not just as I navigate a lot of these very uncomfortable growing points in my career that are, like I said, accelerating and terrifying at the same time, but also in my personal life. I've learned to really differentiate between what I do professionally and what I do personally. So in my private life, I don't often engage in conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with all of my friends. I am very good these days about politely not engaging in those types of conversations when I'm at a dinner party or having a cocktail or whatever. You know, I need to be able to step away from that space in my own personal life, because otherwise the weight is crippling and it's too much. And that's to say too, I mean, even in my own personal life, I face, you know, the challenges that come with living, and I need to make room for those. I also recognize, and I'm very good about this, I build community wherever I go. I know that I need people to be with me, that I can reach out to. That might be a colleague that I feel comfortable reaching out to late in the night as a second pair of eyes for a piece that I might publish the next day. That could be a colleague at a different institution that I can call and say, you know, there's a weird political situation and I don't quite know how to navigate it in the most formative way. Whatever that is, that's important to me.
So I'm hearing you don't do this work alone. You have a team to do the work. You also have this community that you build that is a community of support. And one of the things that I love in talking about having a therapist, and I've had therapists and coaches, and you just pick what you need and the time that you need it. We hear a lot from women that, you know, it's hard sometimes to invest in ourselves. And a great example of this is that I think these statistics might be 4 or 5 years old, but when you look at professional development and how they're, who pays for it, men are significantly more likely, like 80 to 90% of men will actually ask their, first of all, they'll ask their companies to pay for it, or second of all, they'll just out of pocket pay for it themselves. And it's much lower. It's like 30 to 40% of women are reticent to ask their employers, and also then feel strange about taking that money out of their budget and investing in themselves. So what would you say to someone about how do you get over that? How do you decide that you're worth investing in? How did you get to that place?
That was a journey. I learned how to do that because of my community, because I have badass women in my team, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the bottom line. Just women that said to me, you know, no, this is reimbursed and this goes on your P card and that's how this works. And I also think, you know, we have to really understand our institutional context. You have to understand, you know, the organizational structure, where you're at, what's available to you. This is critical. People have asked me in the past couple of years that I've had to deal with a lot of things in my own personal life. Like, how are you doing it all? Well, because I am aware of what's available to me. I am aware of what an HR partner at the institution is supposed to do and how they're supposed to work with me, etc. And don't be shy to ask for what you need. I mean, it's been my experience that whenever I ask for what I need, even if it's a really big ask, and I've had some big asks, I rarely get shut down. This just opens the door to a conversation, and this opens the door to a negotiation. And so I think women just need to negotiate. We need to negotiate our lives. We need to negotiate our lives in our professional settings, but also at home. I'm a big negotiator at home as well.
No, we're talking, I mean, you're doing this at CWC. We're saying, you know, hack the household. You've got to have these hard conversations. You've got to have better language to do it. You know, and of course, right now with everything that's going on and folks working from home, that balance for women and for men, folks of all identities, depending on their family structures, it's shifting. Whatever your family structure is, it has been a little disrupted by this situation. And sometimes disruption is wonderful because it forces you to get more intentional. We see that same-sex couples have better, they have a better balance of how they share responsibilities in a household. And that's because they're not falling into something that is a traditional set of expectations. They're kind of having to create a new set of expectations. COVID is giving us that chance where it's sort of like, let's disrupt everything. So we can't, there's no normal to fall back on. It's forcing us to have these great conversations. So we have a question came in from Barbara Washington. She said, what advice do you have for someone who's struggling with bringing their authentic self to the table?
I would say just start reflecting on what aspects of your authentic self are giving you pause to share with people. Reflect back into your own life experience. You know, what do you think in your upbringing and your biography has given you the message that it's not okay to bring our whole selves to the table, especially as women, right? What are you concerned about? What's the fear? Because I think there's a lot of fear underlying this, right? There's a lot of fear, and we second guess ourselves as women around, you know, should I say that that my kid is sick for the 5th time this week with a cold, or yet another one of my kids is sick, or should I bring up, you know, some issue with daycare today that won't be seen as professional? The bottom line is bringing our whole selves to the table is only going to invite others to do the same. Absolutely no one that we work with has no personal life and struggles and passions and achievements. And, you know, I mean, this is just a reality. I would reflect on that and maybe just take small steps and pivot, start pivoting slowly. You can share one aspect and see how that lands with people. You can then share more and see where that lands with people. And then recognizing that on any given day we'll feel differently. I have days where racial battle fatigue is real and I'm exhausted, right? And the last thing I want to do is bring anything else to the table or share anything else to the table. There's days that I just recognize I want to sit back and be a listener, and that's okay. That's completely fine. We don't have to be the same every single day, just as our lives are not the same. They're not constant in that regard.
You know, I love the fact that you're giving us permission to not always have to be at the front or at the front of the fight. And I think that it's so great that you're able to kind of give yourself the permission to step back sometimes, whether it's immediately in a conversation or in the context of being with friends. And so you carry that in your soul, but sometimes you don't activate it fully and turn up the volume on it. And I sometimes get a little guilty. You know, I feel a little guilty when I see something and I don't have it in me in that moment, or that's not a person that, you know, I think is ready to be engaged in a courageous conversation. But so I just want to thank you for that, because I sometimes need permission myself to turn it down. So we have a question from Abigail. It's kind of a big question, so I'm just going to read it all to you. There are a few things in here to unpack. And we only have about 10 minutes left, so I want to get to some other questions too. So, so just to kind of note our time. Can you speak more about navigating the angry people of color, women of color in predominantly white spaces, especially with white women? Given what just happened to Christian Cooper, I've dealt with so much of this in the classroom from a lot of white feminists. How do we balance being a woman and a person of color in these cases?
Yeah, that's a tough spot. I'm very intentional about designing an intervention around that. When I anticipate that it's going to come up, and I know it's going to come up, and likely it sounds from your question that you do too, whether it's going to be triggered by content, whether it's going to be triggered by current events, whatever it is, we know it's going to come. This is where I try my best to depersonalize and reframe within a broader historical context. And it's interesting because this morning I was talking to a white female colleague about this, and she said, you know, is this white women's tears here? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And what does that actually mean, right? And so when we have these conversations, I try to first make the person let them know that you want to have a conversation. You know, we're living in an exacerbated call out culture where people think like it's just fine to call out, right? And have very little tolerance for other people's opinions and where they're coming from. I would first just, you know, say, hey, you know, let's have this conversation. Why is it problematic? We don't have a baseline shared understanding of why these issues are problematic and triggering for people of color, right? That we have to assume that does not exist. So likely this person does not know the history. This person might not even know what happened to Emmett Till, right? And
right.
How this triggers that horrific historical events. One of the first ones to actually be showcased in the national news, right? Emmett Till's body was photographed, was on national newspapers. It was the first time in the United States that one of the first times this happened. So it triggers that in people, but a lot of people don't know this history. And we go back to the need for inclusive pedagogy there, right? Like, why is this not a part of curriculum? Why are we having students graduate, you know, go through K through 12 without truly engaging critically with their history, with the people who are missing from that history, the events that are missing from that history? This is problematic. And so in my own work, I also recognize that I cannot educate everyone. And I would say, you know, a good place to start would be to question your own whiteness, interrogate your own whiteness. And I don't mean this, you know, in a way that is very condescending. It's not condescending. It's not the goal. And the person will likely feel it that way and they'll be reactive. And we know, right? And there's literature on this. And so just tell people what to read. You don't have to do all the heavy lifting. You can tell people what to read and then have a conversation with them.
Yeah, I find it to be really, really important. And I think that, you know, I certainly am seeing a lot of things that are saying like, hey, to my white friends, why are you being so silent? And then at the same time, you know, I had to think long and hard, like, God, what do I post? And how do I be a good, I like the word accomplice better than ally, gets us into more trouble. But you know, I think about that. I just want to say, I think that, I think we need to just keep having dialogue about this. And I love that you go to a point of curiosity and sort of like, I think if everybody could approach these conversations from a place of curiosity, because you want to do it right, but you don't want to shut it down so that people don't do it. So how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, you want to lower the affective filter. Emotions run high, right? People get triggered very quickly around all of these issues. They make it about themselves. They immediately go to that ego, right? Like, what's my role in this? I'm passive. I haven't done anything. You are saying that I am X, Y, or Z. It happens. And so lower that affective filter, depersonalize it, and frame it within, again, the structural context. We're not having enough conversations about structural oppression. Like, this is structure that we're talking about. And until we start talking about the structural components in our educational system, starting from preschool to Ph.D., until we really start, going into those, starting to revise the entire curriculum, revising what constitutes a canon in any one discipline, right? We're not there yet. We're working toward it. We're not there yet. But I think until we get there, to help people understand that we are within these structures.
We are within these structures, and I think that the hard part for me on the press is that we see a moment in time. We might see 8 minutes in time. We might see a second in time or a snapshot. But what's important for us to focus on and where the change is made is everything that led up to that moment. Right? Like, there's so much that goes into the creation of those moments. I just think it's where we want to focus, and yet it's not necessarily what we see on in the press, right? So we have to have the discipline to kind of push that. Okay, so another question is, how are you talking to your kids about this? How do you talk to your kids? How should I talk to my kids? Whew.
Yeah. So this is a big one. We've had, so I'll just preface by saying some of my children identify as white.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think we may be.
Like, and they'll, am I there? Am I here? Okay. So
Yeah.
some of my children identify as white. Some of my children look Latino and tan like me. And it's really an interesting duality that I have to navigate in my own personal life at home as a mom, because I have to have conversations with my Latino presenting child that I don't have to have with my white presenting child, right? And that can be around, you just got your driver's license. Let's talk about what happens if a cop pulls you over. What I need you to keep in mind, what I want you to do with your hands, right? This is very real. This is real. And this is real parenting right now. It's also been triggering when one of my children started going through high school, and up to that point had lived in this panacea of fun and sports and academics, and boom, all of a sudden microaggressions started happening, and my child didn't have the language or the theoretical structures to depersonalize and start to contextualize within what it means, why it's happening, it's not your fault, and how do we deal with it, and how do we call it out when it's happening, right? So starting to have those conversations was hard. Looking for literature that is age appropriate. We don't have too much of it, but there's some great books out there. There's one that was published very recently. I just had it on my desk, and I'll show it for anybody who's here, who has kids, who's parenting. This book is anti-racist. This is written for kids to understand racism, to understand power, privilege, oppression, to understand how do you reply to a microaggression from your friends. You know, these are triggering conversations for me to have at home.
Right.
And I can only imagine, how is the conversation unfolding in a household where the parent does not have this type of understanding around these issues, right? Where do the children get the language to conceptualize their experience in the world in a way that doesn't hinder their development and their academic success, but actually propels them to be more, to want more, to learn more, and to become more agile in this setting? You know, I think, and that's where, you know, representation in our educational system is critical. We have children going through an entire educational experience in high school, in middle school, elementary school, in college, without having had a faculty member that looked like them, that validated their experience in the world, you know? And what we know from those environmental settings, those environmental aspects is the students will just internalize that you can't succeed here. No one that looks like you succeeds here, is here in a position of power. So that's something that we all need to talk about.
When you think about, I mean, you're providing the language, how do you provide the emotional support for your kids? What do you do on that front? I mean, just in terms of empathy and what's a suggestion? You know, sometimes it's about a hug too. And I mean that, you know, as a metaphor, but how do you do that part?
Yeah, so I'm very, very close with all 4 of my children. So I have a hard time relating to experiences where like, you know, I hear like, oh, you have teens, you know, I love teens. I think teens are awesome. They're just, you know, living life on Technicolor, right? Like everything is so poppy and bright and new, and they want to engage and they have the energy to do it. So I meet them there. I meet them where they are. That's not to say that I'm their friend and they will laugh that I'm saying this, because it's true. I tell them or remind them, I'm not your friend, I'm your mom. But yeah, it looks like that, you know, understanding what my children might need. So you know, I've had instances where my younger child in elementary school has had, you know, a difficult day and has been bullied by another child. You know, I'll work through it with them. And then of course, like, you know, the bear mom in me comes out, and that's where you know, I call it out, and I work with the administrators of the schools also to share like how my children are doing and what their needs and what I'm seeing around race happening and what I'm seeing around gender happening. And so I'm very vocal about that, and not in a punitive way, but, you know, keeping those lines of communication open. And I absolutely love that my children go to schools where the administrators are, you know, in one case, a Latina is the principal, and in the other is an African-American powerhouse academic who's a principal, right? So we can have these conversations and knowing what they need. You know, I don't shy away from saying to my older children, we have a psychotherapist in this house that is available to you whenever you want. Right. You don't have to tell me. You figure it out. You make and my children do that. They will make the call. They will meet with this person, and, you know, I'll check in and they'll say, oh yeah, I feel better after that. I realize I can take it all, right? I don't have all the tools.
Well, it goes back to your idea around team, right? I mean, I think you're teaching your children to create a team and to create a community, and you might be at the center of that as the mom and the matriarch in your structure. But I think that teaching kids that they have to have a committee. They've got it. They do. They need, you know, sort of a board of advisors as they grow up. So, all right. So we have time for just one more question. We have about 2 minutes left. And I think that, what do you have in terms of, what are your top 5 recommendations? What can we do right now in our environment? So we talked about the inclusive pedagogy that's within a classroom, but I think we can take that into other environments and we can use some of those tools. So what are 5 really important, 3, I don't know, but your top takeaways of like, what's really actionable here?
Be kind to yourself. Just know that you're not going to rock every single day. You know, no, and that's true. I think anyone who's an overachiever or a type A or in a leadership role, like, we really strive to be the best that we can be every single day and be the best colleague and the best partner and the best this and that. And recognize that, no, there's going to be days that's just not going to happen, and that's okay. Tomorrow you start a different day, and you don't have to carry yesterday with you, and that's fine. I would say, if you're having those moments where you're going back in your mind about what you should have said to a colleague or how you should have acted in a meeting, sit with that and read about that, because that's telling you something, and that's inviting you to really engage with a way to pivot, right? That goes back to a question we had earlier today, like, to pivot. There's some aspect of your identities and how they fit within the context that you're in that is not fitting well. That puzzle piece is not really fitting well. So reflect on that and see why there's discomfort there. And you can't be all the things to all the people. You can do everything with excellence. That's a fact. And I do think, and I'm vocal about this, I do think that women can have it all. It's just that it may not look like we imagined.
Right.
And that's okay. And that's okay, you know, like leaving that space for embracing the mess when you need to embrace the mess. At work or at home, that's okay.
I love that. I mean, I think that nails it for me. That carries me into my next month or so. But I know I really like the idea of being kind, and of reflecting, and then of knowing that we have the permission not to be all things to all people, but that we can be everything we want to be. That just weaves so nicely as the Valentina. I can't imagine, like, if I were your child and you said, I'm not your friend, I'm your mom, I'd be like, but you're so cool. I really want you to be my friend. Like, you know, I mean, my mother-in-law, who's awesome, but she just has that sort of a mother quality, right? Like she's a little bit different. She used to always say that, and I would be like, yeah, I get that. I totally get it. I get why you said that to Mark. But with you, I'd be like, no, please. So I'm glad that we're friends. I'm glad I'm not your child. And I want to say thank you for being here today and just kind of sharing your hard-won wisdom. And it has been hard-won. So inspiring us to be courageous. Just thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's my first Facebook Live, and I hope that everyone who listened to us got a few little golden nuggets, that we are all in this together, and we struggle together, and we win together, and we will relish on what we build together down the line.
Yep, we sure will. All right, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll just keep bringing you fun blogs, and you know, we always say the status quo is not our jam at the Colorado Women's College. And so that's what we try to do on these conversations, is to bring you ideas that may disrupt your thinking and help your lives be more fulfilling and deeper. So thanks for being here.